welcome back, as I said, to the best practices track. For those of you that may not have been in any of the other sessions, this is a little bit unique because we're pairing industry experts with brand side marketers and really trying to focus more on giving you some tactical how-to tips that you can hopefully take away and improve your marketing and marketing operations. And today we have this next presentation, we have a little bit of an interesting topic, and it's something that I think a fair amount of us may struggle with, and that's that idea of how we build capacity and how we define whether we build internally or whether we look to outside experts to outsource some of our marketing operations. And that challenge was faced by our next presenter and handled it in somewhat of a unique way. Now, you may have been in the best practices session the best in show session yesterday, where Dan Briscoe, the VP of Marketing at HCSS, presented about the winning campaign, I Build America. Well, we're gonna talk today to the marketing operations lead that powered the engine behind all of that. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Kara MacDonald from HCSS. Kara, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
So Kara, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been with HCSS 14 years. There were 50 employees when I started. Now we're up to 250 employees. I've been in the marketing department 13 out of 14 years. My role's primarily been lately making sure that our team has the resources and the tools they need to execute all of our projects and our campaigns. So that ranges from working with the other two marketing heads to make sure that our team organization is what we need and planning for the future of what that's going to look like. It's also making sure that the technology we use in marketing is up to speed with what we need, and also the sales team. So we have a lot of automation between marketing and sales, and so I pick out all the sales technology and help them with their training. I also run our annual users conference, and we have about 1,500 attendees for that every year.
It's a lot of hats. So I know that a lot of us were in the Best in Show session, probably have a familiarity with HCSS as an organization. So I'll ask a slightly unique question. You know, if I am your customer, why is HCSS so valuable to me?
So HCSS started out in our CEO's bedroom. He really put the customer first from the beginning. He gave out his personal phone number. I mean, he still does give out his personal cell phone number. If you had a question, you needed something, we had 24/7 technical support. It was 3 rings or less, and we continue that today. The company's been in business 31 years. So every time a customer has a problem, even if it's not technology that we have sold them, if they're submitting a bid the next morning and something happens, their computer gets corrupted, we help them restore a backup. We work through the night with them to make sure that they can get that submitted the next morning. We also do things like town halls at our users conference to say, these are features we want to add in the software, but we want to make sure it's something that you're going to use. So please tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly about these features and whether it's going to work for you.
So that's really a somewhat small company still, but you're doing some really big things. And I know we highlighted one of those things yesterday in the Best in Show presentation, which is the I Build America campaign. So for those of us that weren't in the room, why don't you give us a little bit of a quick overview about the I Build America campaign?
So I Build America started about November of 2015. Our CEO came down and said, I keep hearing all of our customers saying that they're having a hard time hiring and retaining workers in the construction industry. Nobody wanted to go into construction coming out of high school. Nobody wanted to do construction management as a major in college. And we felt a sense of kinship with our customers. They come to our conference. It's like a family reunion. And it really kind of hurt us to know that they were struggling. And so the I Build America concept came about, and we realized it was a big movement that we were going to have to struggle with the team that we had. So we wanted to make sure that we did it right. It was important to make sure that we were successful from the beginning.
You want to talk about some of the results that you experienced with the campaign?
Yeah, so HCSS, with our products, we had very, very poor social network followers. So once we launched I Build America, we ended up with 30,000 social network size, which was unheard of for us in a year. We had associations that we really didn't do much with other than attend their events and sponsor some of the things. They were starting to reach out to us and say, we want to be a part of it. How can we join you in this movement? We're running a campaign right now to get founding members to help fund this because we want it to be basically a nonprofit. And our web visits have gone through the roof. We have had to change our web technology a couple times because of it.
Now, so let's flash back a few years. Before I Build America started, you were a smaller organization, right? And so tell us a little bit about what the business was like and what some of the challenges that you might have been facing before you really started to see some of the success.
So about a couple years before I Build America, we were still really trying to execute our projects. We had a very small team. There were about 8 to 10 team members. We hired our first graphic designer. That's something that we had outsourced before or people like myself had done, and I am not a graphic designer. So we had a lot of projects that we already did between executing our events and supporting the sales with the 7 products that we promoted. So how did we manage that and take on such a huge movement with a bunch of moving parts? We realized that we were inefficient in what we did with the stuff that we had before the movement, so how can we add those in together? And one of the things we found too is our internal team were the ones that knew our customers the best. It's such a niche market, a lot of people outside of it didn't really understand them.
And so you started weighing with this concept of how can I actually start to bring some of these activities in-house as opposed to leveraging outside resources to do that. So I guess this is probably something that a lot of us struggle with as we balance between in-house versus outsourcing. And so I guess the first step in this process and the first step that you went through was, hey, should I determine what I can take in-house? And that's not necessarily just a single decision point. So why don't you walk us through some of the key decision points that you had along the way that helped you make that decision?
Okay, so the first thing we had to figure out is what we were good at and what we weren't good at so that we knew what we really wanted to outsource. And back in about 2013, one of the things that we had outsourced previously was our PR. We had a PR rep that was phenomenal in the industry. We got lots of publications to publish stories on us, and he was retiring. So we had to come in and say, okay, well, we're gonna take a stab at it. Let's see if we can do it. But the next 2 years, we couldn't get in the magazines, and we realized it was because of that relationship he had with all the editors, everybody at the magazines. They didn't know really who we were, even though we were the ones previously providing the content. So we decided, okay, this is not something we're good at. Let's find another PR rep, and we just found one about 6 months or so ago.
Yeah, and so you saw a pretty significant decrease in the press mentions, and that's it's a surprising number, but thank you very much for sharing. And I think this really speaks to the importance of being able to experiment and being able to experiment and transition quickly, right?
Right, that's exactly right.
So you found something that was better to outsource, but at the same time you just talked about that idea of your customers best. So what were some scenarios where it was actually better to look internally and leverage?
So one of the things that we did was we had a new product coming out, and we really need to launch a lot of content very quickly. So we thought, well, we'll have a company come in, do our content for us. So they really worked on 20 pieces, anything ranging from blog articles to infographics and everything in between. And we realized we weren't getting the results that we wanted out of the content. So we decided, let's try doing some in-house. The Fatal 4 Fall Hazard infographic, I think, is the first content piece we did in-house, and saw huge results from that. And so we had to step back and really figure out why we were having such a bigger impact. And it turns out that our outside agency was using very, very high-level content, but what our customers were looking for was something that was very, very specific. And they wouldn't know that unless they've been on a physical job site with the customer. So every morning they'll start a safety meeting before they start their day, and they may be working on a bridge that day and talking about, okay, we need to make sure that you're harnessed up, here's the points to check to make sure everything's safe, and the content that they had delivered to us wasn't that specific.
The specificity converts. That's, I think, something we've seen over and over again in this. And the results were pretty astounding, right?
That's correct. We went from 0 leads from the 20 pieces we had of content before to it was 208 leads out of the 15 pieces of content.
So for some context of what that means to your business, how big of a lift was that?
So it was a pretty big lift because we had such a small team. Mm-hmm. And so I'll show later how we realized where we were inefficient, and actually working on this is what really showed us where those inefficiencies were.
Excellent. So you found things that you were actually better internally at being able to do. Now, I would imagine that there's a lot of trade-offs that have to happen when you're balancing between external and internal. So you want to walk us through some of the things that you look for when you're managing those trade-offs?
Yeah, so some of the things that we learned was if somebody else can do something better than you probably should let them do it. Or if it's something that you can do better than anybody else, it's best for you to do it. Or if you're looking at speed, if speed is going to be really important, like we tried that first because we needed the content, we needed it quickly. So we experimented with that so we could get it faster. Turned out that didn't work so well for us, but something else might actually work better. There's also long-term versus short-term, and a hybrid of internal and outsourcing is actually what led me to the long-term versus short-term decision. Is we had marketing automation software that we weren't using to the best of our ability, and we started getting all this content from our safety product that we needed to set up lead nurturing for. We've never done lead nurturing before, and so we actually had a digital marketing agency come in, help us kind of re-implement our marketing automation software and set up some templates, some Excel templates for that product, so we know what piece of content's going out, what the goal is for each stage, and what results we want to get out of it. And so that way we were able to take that from then on and use it internally in developing our other job roles and products.
And so you found an area where you could actually leverage outside expertise to help some of your internal processes and platforms.
That's correct. It actually really helped speed things up for us. So we were able to get the lead nurturing done for this product very quickly, and then we were set up to succeed in the long term with all the other products.
And so I think we're seeing some interesting themes here, and it may be an interesting thing to look at some other businesses and try to test, and that's that idea of when to leverage internal versus external. So what you kind of saw is that when technical expertise was needed, it was better to look to outsource, such as PR or better leveraging your technology. However, when customer knowledge was important, that's where your internal resources were much more effective.
That's exactly right.
So a couple of interesting takeaways here. I think, really understanding where the expertise lies, being able to think customer first, and then lastly, being able to really weigh the trade-offs effectively between outside resources and inside resources. So we've talked about you've found the balance a little bit. Now it's really about scaling. So how do you make this internal team more effective and building out their ability to take on more projects?
So the first thing we really had to identify was where were our bottlenecks. We did daily stand-ups, we did sprint planning, and we had scrum boards, very large scrum boards out in the marketing area that had each team had a lane, and then in each lane were their tasks they needed to accomplish. And so one of the things that we learned each day in their stand-up were all the teams were moving tasks across the board except for one, and that was our graphic designer. And that was because we had one graphic designer supporting 8 to 10 marketers and everybody else internally to the company. So the other thing that we identified with that was we had a lot of items that were still waiting on approval for our sales team. We had an effort to really help them start closing deals faster, and so we were developing a lot of materials for them, and they would just sit there for weeks at a time waiting on their feedback to say, okay, no, we're good with this, or here's some changes we want to make. So really what we needed to do is start filling in those gaps, and first thing we did was hire another graphic designer, and then we were able to start seeing projects were moving through much faster. And then with the sales team, we took a wall that was over in their bullpen area, taped up everything that we were working on for them, and said, okay, every Monday morning we're going to come collect this, and whatever's written on it, we're going to take and we're going to make the changes and package it up and send it to you. If you don't put anything on it, then you're getting what's already there.
And that's what that image is right there.
That's
actually
the wall. The wall.
So I think you've mentioned something big, which is you added resources internally. You added more graphic designers where you found the bottlenecks. And it's a big theme there. Don't be afraid to invest when you find that. It kind of follows along the idea of experimentation. So, if you're going to experiment, fail fast, but don't be afraid to make that investment. But at the same time, though, investment requires buy-in, right? So you experienced some skepticism internally. You want to tell us about that?
So back in 2014, 13, something like that, we came up with this idea for this most interesting project, bracket challenge. It was a March Madness style bracket challenge that put construction projects against each other in like a popularity voting contest. So we pitched the idea to our executive team and we said, yeah, we need 64 teams. We'll be happy with 32. And they said, well, you're going to be lucky if you get 16. So it kind of lit a fire under us to push us harder. But once we developed the campaign and built the site to do all the tracking, we sent it out and we ended up with over 120 submissions for entries. And so we ended up having to create actually 2 brackets. So once we got the project launched, we crashed the website the first day of voting. We had to disqualify one company because they had Romanian hackers that were doing click fraud. And then we were actually on some local news promoting the project. And so that was really neat to see that they were telling them to go to this website and vote for their local community park.
And so you saw some success with this initial project, and that allowed you to sort of gain the support internally, and so you were taking on more projects, right?
Yeah, it really opened their eyes to what our team was actually capable of doing.
And so this is a timeline of how you took on some of these projects, and I see you've identified where you finally were able to really start or formally start that in-house sort of agency or team. Can you give us a sense of what did it look like before and what did it look like afterwards?
So before, we had probably about 8 to 10 marketers about the time of the most interesting project launch. And then by the time we started working on iBuild America, we were up to, I believe it was about 16 or so people. And when we launched our iBuild America movement, we launched it at our annual users conference in January. We started working on it in November. And we had to get the website up and running, get all the content on there, get all of our social in place, ready to go, and get out and get some customer videos. And our video team spent a lot of time out on the road getting that content and getting the video executed. And then in January, we showed the video, highlighted it in our keynote, saying this is something that we're actually doing for you. And there were lots of big burly men and their construction guys that were in tears because it had such an emotional impact on them. So we had several actually walk out of the keynote, walk over to our marketing team and say, okay, we want to hire you to do this for us.
Yeah, and that's really impressive because now you're almost potentially expanding your offerings. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you started to see some pretty staggering results as an overall organization because of this.
Yeah, we did. We ended up doubling our website traffic, and we ended up with a 42% increase in MQLs, and that was so much that they actually had to increase our sales team too to be able to handle the leads that we're passing to them. Our website just was more helpful. As we were doing this iBuild America movement, we started learning more and more about the customer and their daily lives and what they go through every day. So we were able to make it more helpful to them. And revenue was up 30% a year, which our company does profit sharing. So at the end of the year, that just makes us want to do better.
That's a nice little bonus in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that 30%, I mean, that's an astounding success. And you had some ancillary benefits as well, this idea of time to market and then being able to even expand your offerings?
Yeah, we started doing customer stories. We'd highlight a day in the life of different job roles on iBuild America. We started putting up more videos. Some of them would be a company's featured video. It would be here's a project or here's the individual. We started doing more and more social media, interacting more with people in construction. And then we had several partners. The state of Wyoming, which y'all probably saw yesterday, reached out to us to really help fill a need that they had, and also AGC of California.
And you actually were having these people reach out, and they were asking for marketing-related services as opposed to what HCSS offers as a primary offering, right?
Yes. So we ended up basically creating a whole new revenue stream for our company by being able to offer marketing services, doing video, photography, website, SEO, optimization. In the construction industry, they don't have a lot of marketing experts, and so they were really starting to look to us to help provide that.
So let's go back in some of the steps, and I think it's important to touch on this. You found the right balance between what you build internally versus what you outsource. You have started to create some scale by alleviating bottlenecks, getting a few wins. Now you are actually getting to the point where you're taking on significant amounts of projects. So there's got to be some balance and management there. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you balance your projects internally?
Yeah, the most important thing for us was learning how to prioritize. With the popularity of I Build America, everybody internally to HCSS really wanted to have marketing help out with everything they did too. So it sent our demands through the roof. So we did sprint and backlog planning, and it just still wasn't working it didn't scale fast enough for us. Hard deadlines always had to be a priority. If you have a magazine ad due on a certain day, if you don't turn it in that day, they're either going to run the wrong ad or they're not going to run an ad at all. So hard deadlines always came first. And then we were able to use kind of a value-driven scoring system. So if something's going to drive sales or generate sales, then you could rank it a 5. We also help recruit. Our company is growing enormously, and so we have to help our recruiting team to make sure we get top talent, not just in our team, but across the company. So you kind of give it like a 3-point system. Anything that's improving the customer experience, it's important letting them know there's a product notification out. That would be a 3. And then brand recognition, not quite as important at this point as the other stuff. And then internal use only, we really rank it like a 1. And an example of something that's internal use, we had a convention here last month, and we had 80 employees. I needed a way to get all that information that they needed to them, and so we did an app internally. It's one of those, if it didn't get done, it was no big deal, but it was a nice to have.
Yeah, I think that's really an important thing, this idea, this concept of really value-based scoring, and being able to use a consistent process to be able to score different ideas and opportunities for improvement. So that's a very helpful point. But now talk about, you've been able to do this from a prioritization perspective, but how did you better manage your team? Because you had a lot more people, right?
We did. So we used to do daily stand-ups, and with 6 to 8 people, you talked about what you did the day before, what you got done, what you're working on that day, and any blocks that you might have. And with 6 people, it took us about 8 minutes or so. With 25 people, it was taking us over an hour, and we didn't have an hour in our day to be spending doing that. So we tried a concept of each team would get together and do a daily stand-up, and then the team leads every Friday would get together and say, okay, this is what's going on. And it still isn't the right cadence for our team, so we're still working through that. But what's the next one?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So now we really meet to make sure that we catch any red flags, because that's really the biggest thing that slows us down. Our team, we know that they're getting work done. They're all very, very dedicated to their work. And so now it's just meeting to make sure this is what's holding them back. How can we help them get through that? And how can we start looking forward to things that are coming up and start working on those sooner to execute better?
I really like that idea of being forward-looking in your team meetings as opposed to just being in constant review cycles. I think that's a really big point here. So I want to make sure that we save a couple of minutes for any questions that there might be, but while we're getting that set up, and if anybody has any questions, can you give us some top takeaways, some of the big things that you learned in when you were making your decision of whether to build or whether to buy and how to set up your team properly?
Yeah, so one of the things is to know what you're good at and recognize what you're not good at. We're talking about today, we're probably going to outsource email for us. That's just not something we're good at right now, and we really need some help with it, so we'll let somebody else come in and help us with that. Don't be afraid to experiment. You're not going to know if it's going to work unless you try it, so make sure you try things often, and make sure, though, that it's not detrimental if you do fail. And if you do something, make sure it's not long-term. And also make sure that those victories are visible, because your executive team might not know how well you're doing unless you show them. So you've got to market yourself to your executive team.
Excellent. Well, Kara, thank you so much. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Yes. Ready?
This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Super helpful, very specific. Love it.
Thank you.
Did you use or do you use a specific project management platform or platforms to track your work?
I laugh because we've used a few. We started out the old school way with actual dry erase boards and index cards, and then we went to Jira, which we were sharing with our programming team, and we found some issues with, because we were both in the environment and we did work very differently, that it didn't work very well for us. We just switched to using Workfront, and I mean, like, switched 2 or 3 weeks ago. So, so far it's really started helping us be able to see where things stand. You're welcome.
Well, Kara, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Kara MacDonald with HCSS, everyone.